Sir Keir Starmer this week defended Gary Lineker's right to make comments about the government's new asylum shake-up. The Labour leader claimed that ministers were looking for other people to blame. Starmer said that although he wouldn't have chosen Lineker's words referencing Germany in the 1930s, he defended Lineker's right to say them and has argued that this is a crisis of the government's making. So is Starmer right to back Gary Lineker's intervention on this issue? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome a good friend of the show, Labour Borough Councillor, former head of Brexit group Labour Leave and the CEO of the Independent Business Network, Brendan Chilton. Hi, Brendan.
Good evening, Mark. Good to see you.
Good to have you on the show. It's been a divisive issue. Was Keir Starmer right to take sides?
Well, I've come at this from the starting point that I believe in total free speech. And so the idea that someone should be dismissed for expressing a view, whether you agree with it or not, I don't agree with. So I think Keir Starmer was right to defend Gary Lineker. Again, I think comparisons with 1930s Germany are far too common and they're never very helpful. But I don't think he should have been dismissed for just simply expressing a view.
And what about the political aspect of this? I mean, Keir Starmer's playing to the base, isn't he, by supporting the spirit of what Gary Lineker has said? Because, you know, he's used these remarks by Lineker to say that this is a crisis of the government's making. So he has leveraged it to his own political ends.
I think the majority of Labour members, MPs and activists would have great sympathy with what Gary Lineker said. I also think actually Keir Starmer's right to point out that this is a problem of the government's making. The government have been in power now for 13 years. The migration crisis, and we all know this bill that's been put to Parliament, the idea is to deal with the problem in the Channel specifically. It's not going to go away. This bill is not going to stop people trying to make that crossing across the Channel. And we all know that even if the bill passes, the chances that its intentions going through to their ultimate conclusion, namely flying people to a third party, the chances of that happening are about as equal as aliens landing from the moon, because you've got to get the consent of the third country, and no one's going to agree to that.
It's clearly complex, Brendan, and it seems that Sunak's approach is multi-pronged. There's no one silver bullet. I mean, you could argue they're all rubber bullets. But what would you say to many of my viewers and listeners to Mark Dolan tonight who are ex-Labour voters in the Red Wall who want to stop the boats? And as far as they can see, that's what Rishi Sunak's trying to do. And as far as they can see, Keir Starmer's trying to block this policy by backing Gary Lineker.
Well, I think first thing to say is, of course, Rishi Sunak's been Prime Minister for a few months. We've had successive Tory Prime Ministers that have claimed they're going to stop the boats and have failed. I think the way we need to deal with this, I think both parties, frankly, need to stop using this as a political football and say, where is this problem starting? And it's starting in North Africa and in the Horn of Africa. People are fleeing from that region and coming to the UK, mostly men, because the area is impoverished, there's drought, etc. We also know that Europeans are not doing their job to stop them crossing the Med, and European nations are not stopping them in their own countries. So, frankly, we need to deal with...
They've got free movement, they've got the Schengen, which doesn't help, does it, Brendan? Which is, of course, why you founded Labour Leave, because you are a red-blooded Brexiteer. Just a very short moment to bring my panel in. David Oldroyd-Bolt, Neil Parish and Emma Burnell. Brief comments from each of you, starting with you, David Oldroyd-Bolt. Well, in this drama, in this great debate, Keir Starmer has picked a side and he's picked Gary Lineker.
Can one help but be cynical and detect a trace of hypocrisy in Mr Starmer's comments? I think had Mr Lineker come out and said, send in the Mediterranean fleet and put a gunboat there, anybody who tries to come across into the Med or in the Channel should be shot where they stand, I think perhaps Mr Starmer might have been a little slower to leap to his defence, and perhaps also many of his BBC colleagues. The simple fact is that this has nothing to do with the substance of Mr Lineker's remarks and everything to do with the conditions of his employment as a contractor of the BBC. He shouldn't have said it. He should apologise. And Starmer's being hypocritical in saying anything otherwise.
Emma Revel, you are shaking your head. You want a Labour government. I've got lots of viewers and listeners to this show who are previous Labour voters who backed Boris in 2019 because they wanted to get Brexit done. They want to stop the boats because they think it's a national security, economic and humanitarian disaster. And basically, Keir Starmer is calling them racists by backing Gary Lineker.
No, he really, really isn't. And let's be very, very clear. Your viewers who feel that way are not racist. There is a perfectly reasonable position to be taken about wanting to stop the boats, wanting to break the business model of the people traffickers, but also being in favour of us being an open and welcoming country for refugees. Those are not incompatible. What we have is a system that is not managing to deliver that. What Gary Lineker has said is that we have a system that is absolutely, fundamentally failing to be compassionate and fair and workable. Gary Lineker is supposed to be impartial in his job, not on his Twitter account. And also, I'm not being funny, but I know nothing about football, really, very, very little. And I know that Gary Lineker is a massive supporter of Leicester City. I know that Ian Wright's a big Arsenal fan. So they are talking unimpartially about the things that they are there to professionally talk about all the time. And we've never had a problem with it.
OK.
So come on.
OK. All right, fair enough. Look, feelings are running high. Brendan, great to see you. Come and see us in the studio again.